Hi everyone, and welcome to the first of your week 8 videos. Today we will be talking about post-truth and all the associated issues such as fake news that we have seen arise alongside ideas of post-truth. This is in some part inspired by Oxford Dictionary's naming post-truth their word of the year for 2016. And this was a real indication of the importance of this issue in our current political and media spectrum. And we will go through what this means to our society, what this means to our culture, and those will be our main focuses for today. Don't forget that you have a quiz at the end of this week that will focus on both the materials this week and also last week's material on elections. This week follows on from some of the discussions last week, for example, around political advertising, talking about personality traits among candidates, as we looked at as being also, I guess, appeals to emotion rather than necessarily fact. So please start off by going to the playlist. If you search FMCS 1000 Week 8 playlist, you will get to it, or go the normal way you want to go. So this is the video I'll ask you to watch on the playlist, which is the Oxford Dictionary's Word of the Year account. So you'll see here, and I can't show you that for copyright reasons, but you can go and have a look at it. So if you go to the Oxford English Dictionary, the entry for post-truth says it is relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. So as I just mentioned, this might harken back to that idea about character traits. But it's a sort of, it's a wider issue and a potentially of larger consequence for how we make arguments in society, how we try and convince people, this is the convince module after all, convince people of things. So two examples that they use in this era of post-truth politics: it's easy to cherry pick data and come to whatever conclusion you desire. And in many examples from the media, that is certainly the case. You can see one side finding a study that proves one thing, while the other side uses other data to prove their case. So the idea is this appeal to emotional belief is not always just a complete lack of data, but I guess how you frame and account for and position your facts. So the idea then is that post-truth is, of course, inherently related to and comes after the idea of truth. So what do we really mean when we're looking at truth? And I know that several of you are doing philosophy, so I won't go into this in any kind of level of detail that you would do in a philosophy class, but just try and think through some of the key issues as they pertain to what we're looking at today. So what is truth? It is the quality of state of being true. So there is something inherently true. It could be that which is true or in accordance with fact or reality. So that is about having a relationship with other things that can be established. Or, and perhaps this is the definition that's closest to the post-truth idea, is a fact or belief that is accepted as true. So there are a lot of things that we accept to be true that are not necessarily true. If you look back to the Middle Ages, for example, the fact that the earth was flat was true because that was the accepted belief that everyone had. It wasn't true because it wasn't actually true because it's not in line with objective reality, but that was taken to be true, and it was accepted as true. And I guess that discourse was so strong that anything that contradicted that came under fire. So the first one you remember was the state of being true. So what is true then? True is in accordance with fact or reality, so that relationship again. And also, and I think this aspect is important, that it needs to be accurate or exact. So for something to be true, it shouldn't really just be an approximation of something that's correct. It should be something that's accurate. So you're seeing in accordance with fact or reality. So what are we going to call a fact? Facts are things that are known or proved to be true. Information, and this one's an interesting one here in terms of thinking through the media, that this is such a prominent example. Information used as evidence or as part of a report or news article. So the idea that we prioritize something being true may seem obvious, but within this particular context, we need to think through these things. Refer to a particular situation, and in a legal sense, the truth about events as opposed to interpretation. So it is something that exists or should exist outside personal belief, which is based on interpretation, and have that idea of it being something objective. So you can see the radical disconnect then between that and an idea of post-truth, which is where objective facts are not as important as how you spin them, I guess, as how you relate to them emotionally, how you convince other people to relate to them in terms of emotional belief. So the next video I'll get you to have a look at, it's about 3.5 minutes long, it's also on the playlist, is a now quite famous interview with Kellyanne Conway, who's an advisor to President Donald Trump in the US. And this was very early on in the presidency. It was in relationship to shall we say, scandal. I guess there was a situation where the crowd that came to see Donald Trump's inauguration, the footage of it showed that it was much smaller than the footage of Obama's inauguration. And of course, you know, people in certain parts of the press that opposed Trump used this to make fun of him and so forth. And the press secretary was sent out on his very first outing to insist that this was actually not correct. So this was a situation where it wasn't an ideological argument. It was an argument about something for which there was evidence that couldn't be disproven, but it became a question of argument. So you'll see in this interview that the interviewer is challenging why such a matter, which is a small matter really and doesn't really matter, would be subject to just uttering falsehoods, as he calls it. So go ahead and watch that one and then come back to this video. So a little bit before that interview, but as a result of those kinds of statements, which that was not the first one, they're sort of ongoing things, not specifically using the term alternative facts, which of course has attracted much criticism and hilarity and great concern among various different kinds of media personalities and outlets. So Matthew Norman wrote that the truth has become so devalued, and that you saw this in the first video you watched, has become so devalued that what was once the gold standard of political debate is a worthless currency. So this is the idea that that at one point lying about something would have been sort of a killer in politics, or I think they always did lie a bit, but that at least one needed to pretend or act that the truth was really important. But the idea is, in a world of alternative facts, where everyone has their own truth, does it really then matter? Is the truth really have any value if everyone can have a set of alternative facts that give rise to a different truth about the same thing? So, of course, this then again relates back to what we talked about in week 2, being discourse. And if you think about the relationship between discourse as we studied it and truth or facts, discourse is essentially assembled from cultural products, cultural practices, and may or may not have anything to do with the truth. So, say, a particular discourse about women being incapable of doing something it doesn't have to be rooted in facts for it to be a discourse. So, but a discourse can come to be believed as a fact because it can become accepted and everyone agrees that that's what the truth is. So it's a bit of an awkward relationship there. So I guess the question is, and we'll talk about this in a subsequent video where I talk, I'll tell you a little bit about the work of Hannah Arendt and her discussion of truth and politics, is the idea of, can a political actor of some kind, a government of some kind, create a sort of, use discourse to create a socially agreed upon truth that can be unmoored, disconnected from facts? So whether or not, I personally believe all this to be very important. If you don't have a truth, if you don't have the truth, where are you? And you will never be able to really communicate with each other on a level playing field, and kind of together find something that exists, that is true, that you can agree on. But others might argue that this is not that important. So using again that term, alternative facts, suggests an alternative truth, that it doesn't really have to have a relationship to something real. So this is, of course, not just the case when it comes to, this is, of course, So there's also, of course, the issue, and you may have seen this slide last week. I didn't get a chance to go through it, but the idea is that part of what leads to this situation of post-truth is partisan consumption of media, whether this is traditional media or social media, and that consuming things that already are going to agree with what we already think is unlikely to give us another view into things, unlikely to make us see things in different or more complex ways, but rather only reinforce our existing beliefs, and also limiting the range of things that we consider to be important. It's not just about what we know, but about what we think is important. It can also lead to a situation where there's just not sufficient common ground for us to debate each other and be able to have influence on each other's ideas, which is a vital part of democracy and society and how we function. So I'm coming back, I'm just going to end this video with a term, truthiness. Some of you may be aware of this. It's derived from a moment in Stephen Colbert's The Colbert Report, which is no longer on the air, but was a sort of a satirical news interview show. And even though this was 10 years earlier, it is suggesting something very close, I think, to what we mean when we say post-truth, particularly in relationship to that idea of it being along partisan lines. So Colbert's satire in that show was based very much around him sort of mimicking Bill O'Reilly, who was a famous conservative pundit, and using the sorts of expressions and so forth that he did, the way of speaking, and this speech is very much modelled on that too. So tonight's word, he's using this sort of discourse that we saw very much last year as well, in their elections, and being elitist, constantly telling us what is or isn't true, or what did or didn't happen. Obviously there's a joke here, but it is speaking to something. Who's Britannica to tell me the Panama Canal was finished in 1914? If I want to say it happened in 1941, that's my right. I don't trust books. They're all fact, no heart. So even if a report does not have all the facts, it might have a certain truthiness about it. It feels like it's true. And that is the nexus of what we're talking about this week, the idea of whether or not something feels true and how we find out what is true and how we can be misled. So please watch the next video. It's focused on fake news in the many different ways that it's interpreted, and I will see you then.